I have a special presentation on behalf of the Oracle. Now, Eric, he has climbed his first 14er since he's been out here, and I have gone to the Oracle on your behalf. I went up to a very high mountain as he was stroking his snow leopard, and I asked him, and I said, Eric is a fine intern, a fine man of God, and I said, what would you like to call this wonderful man of God? And the Oracle, he or she, pronounced this name upon you. You will be always known as Eric, the Mauler Suddeth. Thank you very much. Well, it's a great Sunday to be here. Great Sunday. Eric, thank you so much for doing a great job of leading us in worship as well. And I am glad that we have the Oracle in this congregation to provide names for our people. We do not think of souls often. In fact, when you think of souls, you don't think of that very much. And so I challenge yourself, when was the last time you thought about your soul? When did you spend some time intentionally thinking about your soul? Now, in our society, we have become so enamored with technology, we have become so preoccupied with busyness that we have a constant ding on our cell phones at all time. And this idea of silence and thinking about our souls gets pushed out very quickly. Because the idea of out of sight, out of mind is very relevant when it comes to thinking about our souls. That is why corporations spend billions of dollars a year doing everything it can to get its brand in front of you. And so the soul does not operate in that way. The soul is much more humble, very quiet. The soul doesn't demand your attention like the world does. And so very quickly, if you're not paying attention and if you're not being intentional about thinking and spending time with God, God in your soul will very much disappear in your lives and you will not be familiar with it. The soul is non-showy. And the soul is like a wild animal in the woods. If you go tramping through the woods and you're hoping to see a wild animal, you know the last thing you should do is to be loud and obnoxious. You can't be walking through the woods and hoping to see a bear saying, "Hey bear." As soon as you do that, the bear is going to run and you're not going to be able to see it. And so you have to be very still. You need to be quiet. You need to go into the woods and wait patiently. And if you do so, you are unable to encounter wildlife. That is very much like the soul. The soul, if you are not still and quiet, you will not have those moments in which God will be working to transform you. We don't think about the soul very much in our society. But there is this great prophecy in Luke chapter 2, verse 34 to 35. And there is this promise that is made to Mary that Jesus is coming to earth and He will operate on people's souls. There is going to be this dividing when it comes to the soul of man. As you mature in your faith, you'll become more familiar with being with God. Look what it says in Luke chapter 2, verse 34 to 35. And Simeon blessed them and said to Mary his mother, "Behold, this child is appointed for the fall and rising of many in Israel, and for a sign that is opposed, and a sword will pierce through your own soul also, so that the thoughts of many hearts may be revealed." Now, there is going to be this revealing of the true motivations of man, of humanity. You're going to see where people are on the spiritual continuum, that you're going to see how familiar people are with God. Because when Jesus Christ comes into this world, there's going to be this divide that takes place. There's going to be some people who reject God because they're not familiar with God, that they're going to seem to be allergic to God, that they're going to rebel against God because they have not spent that time in quietness with the Lord. And then there's going to be other individuals that accept God and that they become believers and they have faith and they see that Jesus is the Christ. It's because when God comes to earth, when God comes near, if you are not used to His presence, you will reject it. And these Pharisees at this time, they reject Jesus Christ. Now, these individuals are very busy doing religiosity. They are very busy going through the motions. They have all of the acts of God down, and they go very intentionally into doing certain behaviors and habits. But when Jesus comes, they're opposed to Him. They run from Him. They fight with Him. It's because they have not stood still with their souls. They have not stood in silence with the Lord. You will never become comfortable in the presence of the Lord unless you develop the discipline of silence. We are starting a new series on the 4 P's, and we're going to talk about private disciplines today. But I really want to hone in on the idea of silence, of quietness in the presence of God. And this discipline of silence was not developed by the Pharisees. They were so busy going through the motions that it kept them preoccupied instead of having that quietness and peace before God. Look what it says in Luke chapter 2, verse 34. And Simeon blessed them and said to Mary his mother, Behold, this child is appointed for the fall and rising of many in Israel, and for a sign that is opposed. Like a stranger, when you come up to a stranger, you don't know if you can trust the stranger or not. It's almost like coming into the presence of God if you're not familiar with it. You don't know if you should stand back or be embracing of it. But when you have a deep friend that you're very comfortable with and then you see him, you know you don't have to have any walls. You don't have to have any boundaries. This is how it is with silence. When you come in the presence of God through silence, you lay yourself bare before the Lord and you allow your soul to commune with the Lord. But when you live in a world that is so loud, you don't listen to God through silence. And there's everything in our lives to give us distractions instead of silence. We don't open up the opportunity for our souls to come before God. Think about this week. How often did you have intentional times of silence? How often have you come before the presence of God and quietness and stillness? Have you had any times of quietness or stillness to just be in the presence of our God? Our world has done everything through television, internet, work, church time sometimes to keep us so loud that we don't hear God in our lives. Silence is so essential that it takes years of silence to really come and commune with the Lord. It reminds me of this leper. And I'm going to say leopard. I remember I was preaching on the lepers, and I called them leopards. I still don't know if I have this right. So I put the picture up so you know what I'm talking about. And so this leper, there was this man who was a video guy, and he would watch this leper for 17 years. He watched the leopard since it was a little baby. And he would go into Africa and he would watch it and tape it. And he had all this footage. And you could tell he had this intimate relationship. Like this was some animal that he deeply cared for. What was fascinating, though, is a leopard like this, they are very elusive. They don't like to be seen. And if you come into their presence, two things happen typically. Just like the verse in Luke chapter 2, verse 34, there will be some who oppose him and some who accept him. A leopard will become aggressive and you will be scared. Or a leopard will run away. When we come into the presence of God, a lot of times we are so unfamiliar with revealing ourselves to the Lord. We are scared and we're defensive or we run away. But what was so beautiful about this documentary that Gabrielle and Noah and I were watching was at the very end, and the leopard was very old. 17 was incredibly old age for a leopard. The last time that this photographer got to see this leopard, he got out of his Jeep, and the leopard was sitting there eating. And he went and he laid down on the grass, maybe about 10 feet away from this leopard. And it was quite spectacular, because this doesn't happen. He never touched the leopard. This was not a tamed animal. But the leopard did not move. The leopard became so comfortable with his presence that he didn't run. He didn't become threatening. But through that moment of silence, they were able to have this moment. And the narrator was talking, and the guy was talking about, it meant so much to me that I was able to be that close to an animal that I felt so comfortable with in my life. When God, we have silence. Silence is so powerful because you come into the presence of God and you allow God to work. But be careful. God is not tame. Because there's also the discipline of truth. And so when you have silence, you see the discipline of truth. And look what happens in Luke chapter 2, verse 35. There's a revealing of truth. And a sword will pierce through your own soul also, so that the thoughts from many hearts may be revealed. There's something that is powerful when you come in the presence of God. When you really reveal yourself and you allow silence and you don't allow anything to get in the way. There's going to be this piercing of your soul. Because God can do powerful things through you and in you in silence. And if sometimes you may sit back and you think, where has God been? It doesn't seem like God is working. It doesn't seem that God is there. A lot of times it's because you have been so preoccupied that you haven't allowed silence to work in your life. You haven't allowed yourself to have that stillness and that quietness before the revealing presence of the Lord. And in silence, that's when God can move powerfully in your life. That God can reveal truths to you. And He will reveal comfort. He will also reveal your identity. A lot of times we think we can hide from the Lord. But in silence, you can't hide. And there may be some things of your character, of your behavior and your habits. Maybe it's some of your thoughts that you think you're hiding and you can control. But in the presence of Lord, in silence, God will reveal all of that. He will usher away all the fakeness. And He will reveal who He is and who you truly are. You know, we know this because of this story of the Emmaus Road. And so you know what happens in Luke chapter 24. You have these two disciples who are traveling on this road, and they come and they're just discouraged. Bad things have happened. Jerusalem has been in war. There has been this killing. There's been bloodshed. And they meet the stranger, and the stranger, they try to explain, said, "How could you not know what has happened in Jerusalem?" But then they start walking with the stranger. And all of a sudden, the stranger departs. But they're in the meal. And when you come into the presence of God, you can have confirmation that God is working. Because look at this. Luke chapter 24:32. Luke chapter 24:32. How do you know when God is working? How do you know if God is giving you truth? It's right here. Were not our hearts burning within us while He was talking to us on the road? This is an afterthought. They all of a sudden realize, whoa, we have been in the presence of God. And as He was revealing to us the Scriptures of the Old Testament, was our hearts not burning inside of us as He was declaring His truth to us? How long has it been since your heart has burned in the presence of God? How long has it been since your heart has been convicted in the presence of God? Because when you look back and you realize, wait, God was revealing Himself this whole time, and we don't have these moments because we are so infatuated with all the things in our lives that we haven't come before God in silence. Because in silence, you may find something through that discipline that becomes so powerful in your life because you realize the burning in your own heart. Because through silence, God is truth telling to you. And in that silence, He reveals truth through silence. And your heart may be burning because God is being there. When we commune with God, He is protecting us, guiding us, blessing us, comforting us, and it's all around us. If we only take the time for that. It's like a wild animal. You can't just go into the woods and think you're going to see a bear. You can't just go in the woods and be like, if I yell moose, moose, the moose is going to show up. You have to go very quietly. Sometimes it's unexpected. But you go in silence and you will see God powerfully act through that spiritual discipline. I love this quote by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush aflame with God. But only he who sees takes off his shoes. The rest sit around it and pluck blackberries. God is working. God is everywhere in this world. But are we following the discipline of silence so that we see it? Or are we just so busy plucking blackberries in the woods that we haven't realized that God is there? Maybe you have noticed a burning in your heart this morning. And maybe that burning of your heart is more than you want to give it credit for. Maybe you have never felt it before. But God is working in your life. And sometimes we don't talk about burning of our hearts very often. But it happens. And we need to trust our burning of our hearts sometimes. If you want to respond to the message by believing, confessing, repenting, being baptized from the remission of your sins, or maybe you need to respond to the message because you realize that you haven't been given God the time of the day. and you haven't been having those times of silence, we want to help you. We want to pray for you. We want to encourage you. Why don't you do so as we stand and sing the invitation song?